What I want to do here in this second part of our presentation, I want to show you what it feels like to be part of the workflow and what you actually do, what it looks like, what it feels like. So here's the workflow. In this workflow, the most important, I would say, component is to actually know where you currently stand as a community, to know the current state of affairs on any given topic. When you know where you currently stand, then what you can do, you can start identifying issues, identifying what sort of problems you have in your current knowledge, identifying limitations of our current knowledge, and formulating open questions. And then any one of these open questions can become a topic for a fruitful research. And then you can write a paper and propose modifications in your research paper. Once that paper is published, then any one of those modifications becomes a topic of a communal discussion. So this is what we do in this workflow. And eventually, those modifications that the community deems acceptable, those become part of our mosaic. So we change the respective pages of the encyclopedia and the whole cycle repeats. So this is the workflow in a nutshell. Now let's start from the wiki, let's start from the encyclopedia. And the main goal of our encyclopedia is to document, as I said, our current knowledge on scientific change. But how do you document it? We use the so-called semantic approach. What is it? What is the semantic approach? First, I'm going to show you what it allows you to do, and then I'm going to explain you how it works. So first, the fruits, and then the mechanics. Let's go to the category of authors. I'm just going to scroll down. These are all the authors that we registered in the encyclopedia. And I'm going to click on Zoe's page. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff here on this page. You can see the modifications suggested by Zoe here. And then you scroll down, you see all the theories that she came up with, including the definitions, descriptive theories, everything that she suggested, right? Then you scroll down, it gives you an idea of what sort of open questions she came up with, what she published. So everything is here. Now, how much of this do you think was entered manually on this very page? Those of you who never worked with the Encyclopedia of Scientonomy, how much of this you think we have actually entered manually? Well, there's only one way to tell, right? You have to go to the source of the page and you have to check what's going on behind the curtains, right? Behind the scenes. So I'm going to click on that. Okay. That's all that there is. This is what we've entered. First name, Zoe. Last name, Sebastian. That's it. Once again, not because we don't love her. Now, if that's all that we've entered, then how does the encyclopedia actually know about Zoe's modifications, theories, questions, publications? Where does this whole information come from? A legitimate question, isn't it? Where does all of this come from? All this data, that. Where do you get all this? Well, the short answer is that all of that has been automatically retrieved by the system from other pages of this encyclopedia. And I'm going to show you how it is that you enter data on one page and then it's retrieved on any other page. This is how it works. Let's go to the hub of this encyclopedia, which is the community page. If you click here, if you go to this region, if you click on descriptive theories and then you expand, it's going to give you a snapshot of what it is that our community, our scientonomic community, accepts these days. On the left-hand side, you see the topics that we believe are legitimate topics for discussion. And on the right-hand side, you see the respective accepted answers to those questions. So the left-hand side would give you the question, and the right-hand side will give you the currently accepted answer. And as you can see, some of the questions don't have an accepted answer, so those would be the open questions. But I want to focus your attention on the third law as it was formulated by Zoe, the one Greg told us about in the first half of the presentation. Let's click on that page and see what's going on here, right? So far, so good. It's a nicely formatted page. It looks like a regular wiki page. It gives you the formulation. It tells you that the version of the third law was formulated by Zoe Sebastian, so on and so forth. I'm going to just zoom in. We need more real estate. So if you click on a prehistory, it's going to give you the stuff that happened before the inception of Scientonomy. So it will tell you about Kuhns and Lakatoshes and Laudens and what they had to say on the subject. Then you have a nice history section that consists of a few subsections. So if you click on the acceptance record, it's going to show you those communities where this theory has ever been accepted. And in this case, you see it says Scientonomy community has been accepted, it's about like 2 weeks ago. The indicators that tell us why we think it's accepted, And in this case, it tells you that it was accepted as a part of a suggested modification. It's recorded on this encyclopedia, so it's all fine. Now, if you expand that, it'll tell you about the suggested modification where this law was suggested to become accepted. And then it also tells you what sort of questions this law tries to answer. It gives you the description. So it gives you the comprehensive information about this particular formulation. Now, this may look like a normal wiki page that contains a lot of text, but if you look behind the curtains, what you're actually going to see, it's not text. It was entered as a series of property-value pairs. And this is the interesting part. This is what separates this encyclopedia from many other encyclopedias that are purely textual. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to click on the edit box. You see a property, in this case a title, and the respective value, the third law. Property and a value. Another property, another value. Then you have the formulation text, which is a property, and this is its value. I'm going to scroll down, and here you see this is where we told the system that Sebastian is the author of this law. Then you have a formulated year, the description, scroll down. This is where we enter the prehistory, we enter the history, and here is the part when we tell the system that this law is actually accepted by our community. This is the acceptance record. It tells you that the community Scientonomy has accepted it since the 21st January 2017, the indicators and the fact that it's still accepted. As you can see, instead of giving the encyclopedia this information in a purely textual fashion, we give this information in a semantically meaningful fashion. And it's stored in this fashion by the encyclopedia and thus is reusable on any other page. This is what makes this encyclopedia stand out. Now I want to show you what happens if you go even further, if you look at the guts of the system, all right? I'm just going to click this one, the edit source. This is what's going on behind the scene. And again, if you pay attention, you're going to see property-value pairs. It tells the system a title equals the third law. It tells that the alternative title equals the law of method employment, and so on and so forth. And this is where it tells the system that Zoe is the author. So this is the way the information is stored in the system, but this is not the way it's entered by the users, because this would be extremely inconvenient if we force them to enter the information in this fashion. So naturally, this tab is not accessible. The accessible tab is that one. So this is where you enter the information. So once you enter this data in the systematic fashion, it is properly stored in the encyclopedia and is then converted into text on the actual page. So let's go back to the actual page the way the users see it. So this is your actual page. Focus your attention to this sentence here. It says, the version of the third law was formulated by Zoe Sebastian in 2016, and it gives you a nice reference there. The whole sentence was composed automatically from the data that we entered. We didn't write this sentence manually. We just told the system that Zoe is the author, the year of formulation 2016, and we gave the source. Everything else was composed automatically. Now, let's go back and try to add another author and see how the system reflects changes. I'm going to go back, click on edit, and scroll down, and I'm going to click here, and I'm going to add another author. Paul, that's going to be you. Okay, I'm going to type Paul. It gives me all the Pauls that are registered in this encyclopedia. I'm going to click on Paul Patton. Now we have two authors. And I'm going to scroll down, click on Save Page. Look what happened to that sentence. Now you have two authors. The third law was formulated by Zoe Sebastian and Paul Patton. Sorry, Zoe, we'll bring you back, okay? We'll bring you back to the original state. Everything else in the encyclopedia works in the same fashion. This same semantic approach applies to all of the categories of this encyclopedia. What are the categories? Authors. All the topics or questions are the same thing. The theories, which are answers to questions. Your modifications, the suggested modifications. And every item in a bibliographic record, your publications, your journal articles, books, collection articles. Every one of these uses the same semantic approach. So pages in all of these categories are entered on specially designed forms as series of property-value pairs, just like the ones you have seen. Now, this helps establish all sorts of complex relations between these categories. If you consider theory, if you put theory as the center of your analysis, then you'll see that an author can propose any number of theories. So there's this relation between theory and author. Each question or topic can have several attempted answers, several theories that try to answer that question. Each publication can present several theories. There can be more than one theory in the same academic article or a book. Each modification can concern a number of theories. You can propose a modification when you ask the community to accept more than one theory. You can present those 2 or 3 theories as a package and say, I want you to accept this new formulation of the third law and this new definition and whatever comes with it. Similar relations exist between all the categories of this encyclopedia. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to put the authors in the center and see what sort of relations we have for the author category. A theory can have a number of authors, right? There's that relationship. A question can be formulated by a number of authors. A publication can have several authors. And a modification can also have 1 or more authors. Since pages in each of these categories are entered in a semantically meaningful way, the data entered on one page can be easily reused on any other page of this encyclopedia. This is what makes it reusable, because now the system knows that it's not pure text. It knows that, oh, this is the author, and this is the modification, this is the theory. It understands the meaning of what you entered. So then you can retrieve that information and reuse on any other page. And this comes in very handy, especially on those pages that provide summaries of things. I'm going to show you some examples. So once again, if you click on descriptive theories on the community page and click here again, this semantic approach allows us to generate tables like this one, where we see all the questions and the currently accepted answers. It also allows us to work effectively with bibliographic records. I'm going to scroll down here, and you can see these items in our bibliography. They're nicely formatted in the APA style, but we didn't write them in the APA style. What we told the system, we enter the whole information as a series of properties and values. I'm going to scroll down and click on, let's say, Overgaard-Loisel as one of the papers published in our journal. It's the same idea. We tell the system that the name is authority delegation, who the authors are, and so on and so forth. And for each publication, it allows you to see not only its abstract, but if you scroll down, you're going to see all the theories formulated in this particular publication. It tells you what sort of modifications were suggested in that paper. Again, it doesn't cost us anything to retrieve this information, right? Once entered, then you can retrieve the same information on the author page, on the publication page, or on a modification page, anywhere. This is, in a nutshell, what happens when you work with the encyclopedia. Now, once we know where we stand, we can scrutinize our current knowledge and identify open questions. Formulating open questions, as Greg mentioned, is the main goal of the seminar. These are some of the questions suggested in last year's seminar. These questions are properly documented in the encyclopedia, each one of them. And then any one of these open questions formulated during our seminars can become a fruitful topic for a research paper. Let's go to the journal now. Each paper published in the journal comes with a set of proposed modifications. You see what often happens in traditional publications. You can read this fantastically written paper, but then that paper may leave you guessing as to, all right, what am I supposed to do here? What are you suggesting? Yes, you have a thesis, you have a nice argument supporting that thesis, and then so what? Just suggesting a thesis is like shooting an idea into the cosmos, like do whatever you want with it. But that's not very productive, is it? It's even somewhat wasteful. So what we require our authors to do, and we help them to extract from their papers, is exact suggestions as to how our current knowledge can be improved. So here is a typical article. This one is the authority delegation by Nick and Mirka. I'm going to download the PDF file. It looks like a regular article, well, except that it's, I believe, nicely formatted. But so it's keyword, abstract, it's got a couple of diagrams. But the interesting thing happens when you go all the way to the end of it. This is where you have your suggested modifications. This is the first one, and this is the next modification. So I'm going to go back and zoom in this region. You can see that it's properly stated here. And if you want to know the fate of the modification as to what happened to it, let's say you read this paper 20 years after it was published. You want to know not only what the author suggested, what the author was hoping to achieve, but also what actually happened to it. To do that, you need to click on that little button there, the encyclopedia sign here. If you click on that, it's going to redirect you to the encyclopedia page where that modification is properly documented. And then it shows you where you currently stand, right? So that's your modification. It gives you the preamble. It gives you the verdict. And you have to scroll all the way down to see the verdict's rationale, why it was accepted or not accepted. In this particular case, it tells you that the modification was accepted a couple of days ago, actually. And it gives you a kind of a snapshot of the reasons why people thought that this modification is acceptable. Now, the question is, who gets to decide whether the modification is acceptable or not? Who gets to decide this? The answer is the community of scientonomists. We want this to be a communal decision, so it's the community that decides. And where do they do this? You go all the way up and you click on the discussion tab, and this is what you see when you click on the discussion tab. It gives you very simple, I would say, nothing fancy. It gives you a way to comment. If you want to add your own comment, you go all the way to the bottom and you add your own comment. So the goal here is to reach a consensus. That's the point here. The point is not to decide whether the modification is perfect or not. No modification ever is. That's not the point. But you say it's acceptable if you believe it makes our current knowledge at least slightly better. If you believe that this modification introduces at least some progress over whatever we had before that. Let's say you had a definition of something and then it turned out that there's a better definition, which is also not ideal, but at least it's slightly better than what you had, then you say, yeah, I think it's acceptable. So a modification is only accepted if the community agrees that there are no serious objections. This is not a democratic thing when people get to vote and then there's 51% for it and 49% against it and becomes accepted. No, we don't want to have any schisms in our community, right? We want to reach a consensus. So we only accept when there are no serious objections. And if the community agrees that the modification is acceptable, the verdict is documented and the verdict's rationale is recorded. If the community agrees that the modification is not acceptable, then the verdict is also documented and the reasons why it wasn't accepted are summarized. Now, what happens when there is no consensus? What do you do? For that, you need a workshop. For that, you need a special format when you bring all interested parties together with a specific and unique goal of trying to bridge the gap between them. So if there is no consensus on whether the modification is acceptable, the modification becomes subject of a focused workshop discussion. If you compare the workshop format with the seminar format, you see there's a clear difference here. The purpose of the seminar is to identify what's not working. The purpose of the workshop is to try and bridge the gap between opposing parties. We will organize as many workshops as needed to help the opposing parties to reach a consensus and suggest a mutually acceptable course of action. When a consensus is finally reached, the respective pages of the encyclopedia are modified to reflect the changes in our mosaic. So, for instance, if you go to this topic page on mechanism of method employment, you see when Zoe's formulation became accepted, the encyclopedia documented that nicely. If you click on the accepted theories again, it's documented here. This particular record shows you that my original formulation was accepted until lately, and then it was replaced by Zoe's formulation. Now I'm going to provide a little summary here and tell you why we think this is advantageous, what this workflow gives us. I believe it has several advantages. One, it allows you as a community to know where you stand. Second, it helps focus on identifying drawbacks in your current knowledge. Then it facilitates, importantly, piecemeal advancement in your knowledge. You take steps. Those steps can be very radical or those steps can be very small, but in any case, it's a piecemeal approach. You know that this is what we used to believe, let's say a month ago, and this is what we currently believe. And finally, it guarantees that all changes in a mosaic are transparent. Many sciences have achieved the level of piecemeal advancement. So this is not unique, especially if you go to the so-called hard sciences like physics, chemistry. They managed to do that in a piecemeal fashion. But transparent as to why a certain thing became accepted, in many cases that remains questionable because the peer reviewing process happens behind the curtains. Our articles are also peer-reviewed, but unlike the traditional publishing model, our articles are not peer-reviewed with the goal of knowing whether the suggested modifications are acceptable. It's not the task of a peer reviewer to express their opinion on that subject. The task of a peer reviewer to tell us whether it's a quality research, whether the author has a right to be heard. And then the community gets to decide whether the modification is acceptable or not in an open, transparent fashion. So years later, you can go back to that discussion page and see who exactly contributed and why it became accepted. Now, I want to give you a diagram that compares the traditional humanities workflow with our scientonomic workflow. So a few things that you can say about the traditional humanities workflow is that, for one, there is no simple way of knowing what's accepted and what isn't accepted. This is very unfortunate, but that's what you have in the humanities. Any idea that's suggested in these papers, well, they're not systematically documented in a way that you can't distill, you can't extract those suggested modifications because papers are not written with that purpose in mind. And as a result of that, the fate of a suggested modification, the fate of a paper, the fate of a debate remains unknown. There's a famous debate between Loudon and Worrell towards the end of the 1980s. It's a fantastic back and forth between two great authors, but then you're left guessing. What's the outcome of this? What became of it? Have they agreed? What's the community's take on it? The only way you can search it, you have to go through volumes of publications and hope that the answer might be there, but chances are you're not going to find the answer, because that's not how the usual workflow operates. The life cycle of a paper, therefore, often ends with its publication. So many of the published papers just end up in a cemetery of published papers in these archives, never to be retrieved again. Another thing that's not really working in the current workflow is the actual purpose of conferences, seminars, workshops is not really clear. I would say conferences are necessary the way they're organized these days. They are, because they serve an important purpose of networking and spreading ideas. That's great. But we all know that if the task is to advance our knowledge, to solve any issues, well, that's not going to happen, is it? That's not what the conferences do. This leads to a proliferation of ideas, but is not very conducive to the advancement of knowledge. And truthfully, frankly, the actual goal of it is just to get published. Maybe also to pay mortgages, right? Now compare this with our workflow. We have a simple way of knowing what is accepted and what isn't. We document the suggested modifications, and for every modification we know its fate, we know its current state, whether it was accepted or not accepted, whether it's still open. The life cycle of a paper begins with its publication because of this reason. It's only when you publish and present your modifications, that's where the real discussion begins. That's where people start reading your paper and commenting on it. Seminars aim at identifying open questions, and workshops aim at reaching consensus. Both of them have their distinct focus. This leads to a proliferation of ideas and is conducive to the advancement of knowledge, which is actually the goal of this exercise. Any questions about this? Paul?
I think you pretty nicely contrasted the traditional workflow and the scientonomic workflow. Do you think this is broadly exportable to other fields?
That was actually the next slide itself, right? I think it is exportable, but it's not an easy thing to change the mentality, because what this actually requires is to understand that your task is not to publish. Your task is to advance knowledge. In a traditional academic setting, they are rewarded for being published. That's what pushes their careers forward, right? But if you start rewarding them for how they contributed to the advancement of the mosaic, then it's possible to, let's say, have only one paper published, but it's such a comprehensive paper, there's so many theories proposed in it, and those theories became accepted that even with one paper, you can trump, as opposed to, I guess, Clinton, right? You can trump 10 other papers, which, let's say, suggested 10 modifications, but none of them became accepted. So I think it is exportable. I guess all it takes is a goodwill of interested parties. There must be a proper reward system in place. Does that make sense? All right. Matt?
I applaud your effort to try to bring back that whole engagement behind the scenes and bring it to the forefront, because I think maybe part of the problem is that journals don't publish your dialogue to each other, and publishers are not interested in your series of letters that you had to your colleagues unless you're an incredibly famous person, right? And the historians of science in here would probably say, well, that's where I learned all that information in those series of letters that existed. So you're bringing it right to the forefront, and I'm gonna applaud you for that.
Thank you so much. Zoe?
I see the advantages of having the discussion board on the wiki page because everything happens in real time and it's much faster. And in today's day and age, that makes more sense than having to read an article in a journal, then you think of a response, you write one up, it has to get accepted to the journal, then you've got the two opinions, you can see what's happening. I guess the question is, for people participating in the discussion on the wiki page, is there any kind of, I guess, credit that goes to people who take part in that discussion and then maybe make a really important contribution to that discussion that plays a role in, the modification becoming accepted?
I'd say it's a question for the future, to think of a way in which individual merit or individual contributions can be measured. For every individual author, we provide a comprehensive summary of their contributions. But as to how you measure each contribution, it's a difficult question. But at least this way, because the encyclopedia is semantic, it allows you to summarize that and say, what have they done in the last year or last 10 years? And then you can just go to their page and see their contributions. At least that's a nice starting point. Okay? That's it for my part of the presentation. And the third one is going to be next presentation on the future of this project. Thank you very much.